Yawai, everybody. Marangu for joining us today. Bujare Gamarua. This is day 4 of UTS Open Education Week. I'm David Yates. For those of you with the vision impacts, I look like a white male in my early 40s with brown hair and a growing mustache that grows down past either side of my chin. I'm wearing a dark blue collared shirt as well. And I occasionally wear glasses, which I have on today as well. I am on the UTS Open Education Week Program Committee, and I work as a learning design and technology specialist. And I'm going to be facilitating the panel talks and discussion today on the topic of open education for academic reward, recognition, and promotion. And my colleague and fellow Open Education Week Program Committee member, Jenny, will be managing the chat. A little bit of housekeeping before we move on. We will be recording this event. We are recording this event, making it available under a Creative Commons license after the event. If you prefer not to appear in the recording, please keep your video off. Captioning and transcription is enabled. And during the talks and discussion today, we're encouraging questions and interaction in the Zoom chat. Please note that your chat messages can be seen by everyone, and we will if you put your questions in the chat, we may call upon you to speak your question as well, if you like, but we're happy to just take questions in the chat as well. I will now acknowledge country and welcome everyone to the event and introduce the guests. So once again, Yawai, everyone, Bujari Gamarua. I want to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples upon whose ancestral home we reside today. In particular, I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on which UTS campus stands. I recognise the continued connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to this land, waters, skies, kin and communities, and I gratefully pay respect to the elders past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge, wisdom, and methods for this place time. Personally, I'm joining from Wumu on Dungari saltwater country. There's a little snippet of an image at the bottom of the screen there that I took a little while ago, showing Bita or Front Creek in this area. And in Dungari country at the moment, the mullet are starting their northern migration. Season of the butterflies is starting to come to an end over the next couple of weeks, and the river mangroves are starting to flower. So I want to extend my respect to the elders of the Dungari country as well, where I'm situated, past and present. And I would also like to extend that respect to the elders of the lands you may be joining from, wherever you are in the world. And for any Indigenous people joining this event today, and I'd like to invite you all to acknowledge the places where you're located in the chat, because we don't just have a colony problem here, we have an empire problem, and that's creating and forcing us to face some pretty catastrophic risks. So but fortunately, we do have great leaders in Indigenous knowledge systems who are committed to resolving these multiple risks all throughout Australia, but also at UTS. And they're doing this by creating areas for embassy and exchange. And I guess it's in that spirit of embassy and exchange that we're coming together for this Open Education Week, and particularly today's event, where we're looking at how our values for increasing access to education, engaging in open pedagogy, trying to decolonize systems, can also allow us to receive the recognition that our institutions and academic careers require. So it's my great privilege to introduce our 4 guests today. Here are today's speakers. I would like to introduce Dr. Amanda White OAM, Associate Professor, Accounting and Discipline Group from the University of Technology, Sydney. Amanda is well known and highly decorated for work in producing free and open accounting education materials and communities. Probably very well known for Amanda Loves to Audit YouTube channel. She's also an advocate for academic integrity education and the co-author of the open textbook Accounting and Accountability, which we might have a link to that in the chat at some point. I'm not sure. Yes, thank you, Jenny, for posting it there. Our next speaker is Dr. Julian Paquet, Senior Lecturer Biochemistry at La Trobe University. Julian is co-author of the open textbook Threshold Concepts in Biochemistry, and also the author of open textbook Foundations of Biomedical Science. Julian has also documented and openly published his academic promotion application as an exemplar called OER-powered academic promotion application. He was also awarded the 2024 SDR Scientific Education Award. So welcome, Julian. And Dr. Susan Gasson is our next speaker, Adjunct Senior Lecturer, James Cook University. Susan and her team were awarded the 2024 Significant Impact OER Award for their work producing the open textbook Confident Supervisors, Creating Independent Researchers. And her team are currently working on a follow-up to this book as well. And our fourth speaker is Stephen Chang, Coordinator, Open Education and Scholarship at La Trobe University. Stephen is the co-convener of the Open Education Practices Acylite Special Interest Group, which is a fabulous group. If you are not a member of that, go and check it out. And he's also co-authored a chapter called Aligning Open Education Programs with Academic Reward and Recognition in the Open Education Down Under Australasian Case Studies. And Stephen works to create levers for the adoption of open education by mapping institutional promotion criteria with the qualities of OER and OEP, open educational practices. Yeah, I also just noticed that Julia arrived in the room and we were talking about, oops, so I jumped too far ahead or backwards. Excuse my jumpy mouse. So it looks like we have a great audience here today, and I would like to begin by handing over to Amanda. The way we're going to structure this essentially is we'll have one of our speakers talk, and then we'll have a few minutes for Q&A open to the audience and the fellow panelists, and then we'll have one of the other speakers share their experience as well and sort of go back and forth like that throughout today's session. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks.
And let Amanda go for it.
And I know I have a certain amount of time, so put a timer on, because like many people with ADHD, I'm terrible with managing time and managing time blindness. So thank you, everybody. And it's great to see you all here online. I'm super excited. Whenever the team asks me to come to these things, I always say yes, because open education is such an important thing in widening participation. As we widen participation, we also need to recognize that our students have quite often a different financial privilege profile. And so once you make something open, especially when it's a textbook, you get more of everything. So I sort of broke down what I wanted to say based on the three aspects of our session today. And the first one was reward. So what is the reward that I get? And when I first decided to make an open textbook, one of my colleagues was like, why don't you publish this through a publisher? Like, you could make money. And, it's not going to be a lot, but it could be helpful to do something. And what I found was all my work in YouTube made me realize that I prefer the dopamine hit of making something that everybody can use, and you get the random emails of, I'm not at your uni, but I'm at another uni and I couldn't afford to buy the textbook, so I found yours, and wow, has this been so helpful for me. So, number one on the reward thing is the dopamine hit of getting those emails and having students come to you and say, wow, this was so easy to read, or it's so accessible, or whatever it is they like about it. So, that good feeling I always hang on to as one of the good reasons why I do this. I got into university and higher education to have social impact. It wasn't really from a reward, like a research perspective, but I wanted to help young people. So this is all in line with my values of why I do things. And this would be, I say to my students, this is the job I would do even if I won lotto and I didn't have to come to work. I'd still do this. I might not go to all the committees that I'm on, but I would not do, I would still do this. Now, in terms of recognition, these events, as an education focused academic who has a tiny research allocation, these types of events are really important for recognition for the work that I'm doing. And thank you to Maze for getting me involved in the first place, and then David. But these events, publicizing these, talking about them on LinkedIn, connecting with everybody here. And I saw Ash came in and I'm like, oh my gosh, Ash is here. I love it when I get one of Ash's emails that says new thing coming out. And whenever I get one, I always forward it to like somebody I know in a different faculty. Like, oh, hi, physio people. I just saw this new thing. Hey, law person I know. I just saw this new free book. So I'm always trying to think about how I can amplify the work of OER throughout my university in terms of just colleagues and connections. So that recognition is important. And I like looking at the number of clicks on my book. It's nice to see how many people are looking at it, which is great. And then in terms of promotion, for everybody out there who's is an academic and is trying to figure out how do you use this for promotion, for me, it sort of falls into three different categories. The first one is you have to prove that you're an innovator. And I think if you're creating an OER, that's definitely a form of innovation. A lot of promotion applications also talk about what are you doing to improve equity, to help student learners, to help a wide variety of students. And I say this is one of those things. I know that once we made a textbook that was free and accessible and in easy to access language, suddenly every student was accessing the book rather than only 20% of students before who were like, I don't want to do accounting. I don't want to buy the book. I'll just work off the slides. And then once you have that, it sort of creates this tumbleweed effect or the dung beetle effect of, you give them something they can access, they get into looking at it, they engage, and then they perform so much better. Surprise, surprise, when they read the textbook. Um, so there's lots of ways that you can sort of mold this into innovation and leadership in teaching and learning. I haven't been as lucky to be able to convince more people to do it. I convinced one of my colleagues as we were working on two subjects together. But every time we talk about redesigning a new subject or moving into something that's in a very new space, my first question to those people is, if you're creating a lot of stuff, why don't we put this into an OER? Why don't we think about how we can make this available? Because if we're doing things like trying to decolonize and indigenize the curriculum, it's such a hard thing to do. And you worry about using the right resources. But the more that we can share, the more that we can benefit. And if I can use an OER from somewhere else for something, that frees me up for time to do something else. And in the current situation we're in within academia, and I don't know, I wear 50 hats to do 50 different things. If I can help somebody take a little bit off their plate through my OER, or somebody else can help me, that is just such a really great thing. And I love to talk about that as well. So one of the other things I would remind people, if you're using an OER from someone else, write to that person and tell them and say, hey, just want to let you know I'm using your thing and this is just my feedback. Because with a lot of Creative Commons things, we don't really have any idea who downloads it and adapts it and uses it for something else until somebody says, I saw an adaptation of something. So if you are using something that's being adapted, please, I would love for you to get in contact with whoever you found it from and just write that person a little note. Don't make it paragraphs and paragraphs because promotion applications have very strict word limits and space limits. So if you can write them one really awesome sentence, that they can use, I think they would really, really appreciate that. And I think universities realize that teaching students and teaching students well is the thing that pays for rent, electricity, and staff salaries. So hopefully, most universities do have strong recognition for OER. But if it's not, come and talk to one of the people on the panel today or get in touch with us because I'm sure we'd be happy to help you craft that narrative. And really, it is storytelling to demonstrate how important the impact of this work is and the types of metrics and things that we can use. And that is my timer buzzing. So, David, back over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. You've got more time as far as I'm
Oh, I
concerned. I
thought
think
you
you.
gave me like 8 minutes.
Oh no, you got 10. You got 10. But I think you've raised some really wonderful points, and yeah, I think that call to action for people to say, look, if you're using someone's book, send them a sentence, because all that stuff makes a huge difference in crafting the story that they need to tell for their promotion application, or for whatever form of reward or recognition they're going after.
And there's no
So
questions. I've just
yeah.
bamboozled everybody.
Well, I'm gonna hand it over to our other panel members to ask you some questions as well. But I was thinking about, clearly you are intrinsically motivated to do this, and as I'm sure everyone else here is. So yeah, this is kind of a tricky question, I guess, where you're getting that. Well, I guess the dopamine hit is more of an extrinsic motivation, isn't it? In some ways, but you've got
Know
that.
whether it's
Yeah,
extrinsic or
yeah, yeah.
intrinsic, but I know that for myself as an ADHD inattentive, grinding away on a 3-year research project is really hard for my brain. Like, I need to do that with groups. They help keep me focused and on track for those things. But something like this, where I could take feedback from students week to week, I wrote a book 1 week ahead of where the students were. So it actually allowed me to make changes and take their suggestions and really work with them. And we're at a point in my particular curriculum at the moment where we've got to a section of the textbook where I tried to record the audiobook. I also recorded an audiobook. If you've never read your OER book out aloud, reading it aloud makes you realize sometimes that some sentences which read really well sound really awful. So that sort of helped me in that process. But they said, "Oh, Amanda, why isn't there an audiobook for this particular chapter of this week?" I'm like, "Oh, it got really hard because there were lots of tables and formulas and calculations, and I got a bit stuck of how to do it." But it's always one of these things where we're looking to figure out how can we improve. I'm now thinking, could I like use an AI clone of my own voice to read it? And how would that go? And then would I edit? I don't know. So I'm looking at other ideas. Um,
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Jane has a
Susan,
question.
oh,
Interested in any evidence for better
yeah.
outcomes or engagement with open? I have my own stuff, but it wasn't stuff that I gathered ethics approval on. So then I couldn't really publish it. I could talk about it in my own promotion application and in internal things, from clicks to like the number of clicks based on the number of students roughly. We tried to sort of use some of that data and then compare student outcomes in assessment. That's sort of
Hmm.
how we looked at it.
Is that
And
Pressbooks data that you were
yeah,
talking
Pressbooks
about?
data was what I
Yeah,
used
right.
there.
Yeah.
The other one that was a good source for me was I found students who had failed. And that means that before I had the OER, they had done the subject in a previous version and they'd failed. And then they did the subject again in the newer version with a free textbook. And I actually gathered some data from those specific students because I said, what's different between now and then? And there was a whole lot of other confounding variables there, but a lot of students had said to me, the book is free and it's in easy to understand English. I'm an international student, and a textbook written in high academic language was just confusing. And so, you know, we sort of, it's often quite anecdotal, unfortunately.
Hmm. Yeah. So how do you, I mean, how do you track the anecdotes? How do you like, do you keep them all and
I
just,
do. I have a big email
yeah,
folder.
yeah, right.
When you have a
Okay.
bad day, right? You get a nice piece of feedback from someone, you should keep them in a
Makes a
folder
huge
somewhere so that
difference.
when you're
Yeah.
having a
Yeah.
terrible day and nothing seems to be going right, you can open that folder and like pick out one or two and have a little read to, again, give yourself some of that emotional support for yourself that, you know, you're doing the right thing and this is hard, but it is worthwhile. Yes, positivity folder. Amazing.
A little treasure trove you can break out every now and again when you need it. Thank you so much, Amanda. Julian and Stephen and Susan, did you have any comments or questions? Or
Um,
do you want to go
yes,
for it?
Amanda, I really loved your presentation. One of the things I loved about it was that you spoke about the personal rewards, not just sort of career success type rewards, but and obviously, you know, people mentioned you've got this intrinsic motivation, which is great, and I think in a lot of ways I feel the same. My question's about yeah, publishing OERs. Has that influenced you in classroom teaching?
I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. I guess I'm always very open and I'm a believer in transparency helps drive accountability. So I make a textbook that's free for students. I talk about how many students use it. I am very transparent, even in my results. So when students get results, I break down how students did in each question against the criteria, the common mistakes, the common things students did well. I do this for the final exam. And that openness, that idea of being open, I think really drives a lot of what I do because students are accountable to us. As institutions, they're meant to do the work and we're meant to assess that they can meet the learning outcomes according to the higher education standards framework. But I also like to think in with the current generation of students and younger people, they're more um, distrustful of institutions and of experts until you build trust. So the openness of OER has really led me to move down a pathway of openness in lots of other things that help me be transparent with them and for them to see it. Like one time I made a mistake in a weekly quiz. I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone, I made a mistake. Here is the problem. Here is how I'm going to mediate this problem for all the students that receive the question so that nobody is unfairly treated. And that openness that comes from OER and other sort of personal drivers, I think has really influenced how I work with students and how I do want to be accountable for them. If I set a question and it goes really badly, that's not just a failure on the students, perhaps not doing, maybe I used a word, and this happened once, Gen X versus Gen Z. I used a word thinking it meant one thing, and the Gen Z thought it meant something else, and then they did totally different. They wrote totally different things. I was like, this is nothing what I expected. And then when I was talking to some of the students, like, oh no, we thought it was weird you were asking us to do this because that's what this word means in our slang. I was like, ah, okay, so how do I fix that in myself in the instructions to have clarity? So it's really for me about being open and sharing about all sorts of different things so that I can build trust with them so that trust is what drives our engagement.
I was just going to put a little link there that came from lovely library people. So in terms of getting those metrics together, Amanda, you're so right. It's so important to have those numbers. So our James Cook team, Alice and Claire are here today, have got lovely reporting for our press book, but they've also got an adoption place where other libraries and universities can acknowledge that they've used the textbook. And that WorldCat's another way that others around the globe can come in and say, yep, we're using that book. So there's little tools that you can use. But I agree with you, Amanda. It's so great to hear from somebody who's excited by your book and who has another way of applying it or using it or or making an impact. Yeah, so fabulous. Thanks so much for your presentation. It's been great.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. I am ready to bring you out, Julian, to share your experience. Are you ready?
For a second, I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't want to make it super formal, but otherwise I'll forget what I'm going to talk about. So, yeah, my name's Julian Paquet. I'm a teaching-focused academic. I teach biochemistry primarily. I've been doing that since about 2010, and before that, I was a researcher. I moved into education, and effectively, I'm teaching-focused. I started off teaching third year and second year biochemistry. I was really brought in to teach practical classes in third year biochemistry. One of the things I really quickly noticed that students were struggling with a couple of important areas. One was just basic math. They really struggled. We call it quantitative literacy, but it's really just math. And the others, they were coming into third year and not really understanding some of the really fundamental concepts. And that's influenced a lot of what I've done since, I suppose. I've kind of looked at these sort of two big problems that we've got in the field, one quantitative literacy, and it is a big problem in something like biochemistry. Biology is becoming a lot more predictive as we're going forward. It's driven by technology. It's becoming a lot more quantitative, and students have to be better at this kind of stuff if they want to make an impact in the discipline and move forward. And the other thing is what we call the threshold concepts. Often the really hard to get ideas are the really important ones, and they're sort of missing these early on. In a lot of ways, like all the other stuff that I've sort of got into teaching afterwards is maybe as a result of those sorts of things, I've kind of moved into a bit more of a remedial kind of role, teaching first year biology, teaching biomedical science, but really the mathematical side of it, teaching science philosophy. And I teach at other year levels as well, honours and masters. But these have been really big drivers. And I guess my open education experience has really been around trying to address these particular problems and trying to search for interventions to help with those. In terms of, so that's the initial reasons for writing an open educational resource. And I started all of this well before I knew anything about open education and open education publishing. And Stephen Chang will attest that my naivety, I suppose, when I entered this. And I'll do things a little bit differently, probably starting out with what I know now. But I was really interested in improving quantitative literacy for my students. That was something that really motivated me. And I spent a lot of time assessing their skills and developing diagnostics to look at really where they were going wrong and trying to understand that and try to improve teaching. I kind of, after a while, I got the intervention that I was wanting, which was to develop a first year subject for biology students. It was really for their biomedical science cohort and called Foundations of Biomedical Science, which is the name of my first open education resource. And this is really maths by stealth, right? So it was a math subject that we disguised and cloaked in the garb of biology and tried to make it relevant for the students. And I realized they needed a resource for that. So I just began doing that, writing that in a probably pretty inefficient way. But eventually, I got, it was suggested to me to publish for our e-bureau. And that's how I got into open education publishing. And that was the first book. And the story is quite similar for the second one as well, which was a collaborative effort. But it was really addressing this problem of students not understanding those threshold concepts in biochemistry. So the motivation was really just to improve outcomes for my students, right? That was really what it was about. I didn't think anything really further downstream. And like this diagram I've got here is complicated, and that's part of the point of it. Designing open educational resources as interventions is a lot more complex than what I initially thought it would be, right? And I think educators will come into it here. They'll have a particular teaching experience and they'll sort of see where the deficiencies are, and eventually they might think about developing something like that. But there's a lot of process that has to occur for that. And eventually, I guess at the end, you hope that you've got something which is usable for your students. But there's a lot of iterative processes that go on beyond, go on to create that. First of all, just because you've got a particular teaching experience maybe doesn't necessarily mean that you need to develop an open educational resource to address it. You need to think really clearly about that. And I guess the way we value information has changed dramatically the last few years, particularly with how we can retrieve information so well using the large language model AIs. So you need to think about like what it can do in that context. And in terms of the reward aspects of it, those ones that are going to maybe help your career will come probably not just at the end of this process, because it's not a linear process. It loops back, right? So you need to evaluate what you've done and see what impact it's made. And hopefully that feeds back into your teaching experience. But it may be only after you've run these sorts of things through some iterations that you'll get that data that will allow you to kind of justify some kind of reward or recognition for it. But anyway, understanding that process, I think, would be helpful, right? And I certainly didn't understand it when I initially began, because a lot of the things that, in terms of collecting data, these are things that you can think about really at the start. And I'm only sort of thinking about those now. But in terms of reward and recognition, there is like a personal reward as well for this. And I was really happy to hear Amanda talk about that. Again, the motivation was to help out students, and I mean at that one basic level, you'll just by doing it, you'll gain new skills, in terms of publishing and understanding multimedia. But there's this potential for better teaching as well, and having a wider impact for your teaching, which is I think it's a pretty important reward in itself. And I've found that it has fed back a little bit to my teaching as well, thinking really clearly about what the threshold concepts that I want to teach are. Means that I've reworked my lectures, and there's probably no need for another biochemistry textbook which just spouts facts. There's probably no need for a lecture series from me which just is didactic and spouting facts as well. So those two things have there's been an interplay between them. I've been lucky enough to get some recognition from colleagues for this. So probably the one I'm most proud of in a way is being recognised by my peers in biochemistry and molecular biology for developing these resources. And last year I won Scientific Education Award. It's led to some grant success as well. We've been able to commission some journal articles about what we've done. I've had a few invited talks, and the other thing that's I guess really important for me is that international recognition and having other people see it is really important, right? And getting feedback from those. So having the international academics and things adopt some of your text and use it and give you feedback on it is invaluable, right? It's hard to get good peer feedback at all. I know that my promotion application has been shared around, and I'd ask you to look at it a little bit cautiously. I wasn't successful with all of this recognition to get promotion in the end. And there's not, it's hard to kind of draw a lot of conclusions from just my own one personal experience. And it'd be pretty easy for me to just to complain about things. But it probably does give us a little bit of sort of food for thought. I always tell my students that, just don't worry too much about the accreditation. Concentrate on the learning, right? And the accreditation is just going to come. Right. And I try to emphasize that. And I guess in a perfect world, if you just concentrated on your good teaching as a teaching focused academic, you'd hope that would translate to good student outcomes, and that would be recognized in itself, and that should lead to promotion. So in a perfect world, like scholarship in the pursuit of enhancing education would be rewarded. Even better if you could actually enhance educational outcomes for your students, right? Often these things aren't in perfect alignment. And it's probably worth thinking about the reasons for that. I mean, in reality, measuring educational outcomes is really tricky, right? And if you want to sort of think about your open educational resource as an intervention, it's probably worth thinking about how you're actually going to measure if it's improved educational outcomes. The other thing is you're only going to make incremental shifts, whatever you do. You're very unlikely to have the one solution to all the problems in your open educational output. There's variable awareness of OERs. So even in terms of, is it scholarship? Is it true academic output? Some people will doubt that, and I very strenuously disagree with them, but you'll get different views of it. And we're talking about executives at institutes. I think there's, again, the change in differences in awareness. There's also differences in perception of what OERs are. And there are people who still question the quality and reliability of them. And there is an aspect that they're disruptive, right? So I'm sure that there's a lot of administrators who don't quite know what to do with open education. Certainly disruptive to maybe, or viewed as potentially disruptive to traditional publishing. And then this question here, like, what is a good open educational resource? That's not a trivial question, and that's really hard. And if an institute is going to back open educational resources, how do they decide from one to the other? How do they decide in a competing situation which one's the best one? It's not an easy thing to do, and I'd hate it to fall back onto how many hits a book got, or what its potential audience size is. I get a lot of hits on mine because I'm teaching biochemistry, and it's, you know, like there's service teaching that's fundamental for all biological disciplines. It doesn't mean that it's worth more than something which has a smaller potential audience. So deciding what a good OER is not an easy thing to do. And then I think, like, in general, there's problems in just how we recognise teaching-focused academics and professional staff as well. There aren't really great metrics for evaluation. I tend to get evaluated on student progression and student feedback surveys, and there's lots of problems with those. Open education's been the one place where I've got really good peer review of my teaching, which that's been really valuable. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to do. And I think a lot of our roles, our workload, status, all that kind of thing is not particularly well defined. It varies from institute to institute. And then developing OERs requires some support, right? So it has to be recognised as part of the workload. The other thing is, in traditional publishing, there's obviously financial incentives to bring out a second or third edition, even if there aren't great incentives for actually writing that edition. But open education resources also need to be revised and updated. Now, is that going to be recognised in the same way? You know, if someone writes one from scratch, is that going to be valued more than someone who reworks another one, even though that might be really, really valuable work? Are these open educational resources going to die when that particular academic retires, or are they going to be taken up by other people? These are all sorts of challenges to how to manage these sorts of things. Anyway, I've probably gone over my time limits.
No, it was really good. I'm glad you did go over because yeah, some of the last points that you made there, Julian, are really hitting home. And you know, looking at your presentation, it was clear that there are so many rewards and benefits inherent in the process of doing this work. I like that you brought up the idea that it is kind of disruptive work in some ways. It is, you know, we have seen publishers get very recently actually start to come out and openly attack open educational practices and resources. So but as Sharon has said in the chat, as a librarian, very glad that it is disruptive. And I think it's a disruption that's coming from within the within university institutions, right? It's not some disruption that's being imposed upon us from outside. I think it's something that we're working on together. It's a community, you know, disruption to, you know, for education. It's not something to benefit, you know, some other, you know, interests elsewhere that are changing our institutions. I'm going to read a question from the chat because it was the same question I had, and then I'd like to have our panel also comment and ask some questions. This is a question from Ilana. Is there a potential here for these to be considered as non-traditional research outputs when they have significant research component?
I think definitely. I think I would value them in a, I don't know, in a similar way to other published outputs. I don't think we should be making necessarily these, particularly in education-focused things, in sort of these big distinctions. I probably reach a wider audience and have a lot more impact with my open education resources than I do for any of the published research that I've had. I think that's always going to be very limited. I mean, I think we're even rethinking how we evaluate in education, the education research literature, and it's probably not the right thing to do is just look at the number of citations and that kind of thing. Quite often people will read those educational papers and then go and change their practice. They won't necessarily write a paper and cite it. So I think a lot of the publishers now are looking at, well, how many downloads of this particular article have there been, rather than how many citations, to try to look at its merit. I mean, whatever you do, it's going to be imperfect, but I think just realizing that sort of the way we do things for sort of like the pure or fundamental research in other disciplines just doesn't work in education. And I think we've got to have that similar mentality towards open educational resources as well.
I do have a little bit of a story around this, which is that we were successful in getting our OER Democracy in Difference by Carolyn de Cruz categorized as a non-traditional research output that counted as part of ERA, but it was a battle. It was a long and hard and sometimes, to be honest, bitter battle. And it was really difficult for Carolyn to go through this. And so I would say that it's possible, but it's not easy. And I think it's better. I think it's more valuable to spend time focusing on learning and teaching reward and recognition criteria. And if you're lucky, you might get it counted as research as well.
That's a really good point to make, Stephen, and thank you for clarifying that and holding that example out. 3 years is a long time to be fighting for something. Susan, I could see you nodding your head there as well. Did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, it sort of bleeds into it's the first point that I was going to make when I spoke, which is why I'm trying to think how to share this in a way that's useful. But there's
look, if it is your first point, I'm happy to move on to
is that all right?
Yeah,
and
that's
then,
totally
and
fine,
then,
because
and then
the
we can come back.
time is ticking
it's
along.
The same
So
thing.
yeah. No, let's that's a great segue. So
so
the floor is yours, Susan.
A bit like Amanda I'm going to start, and Julian, I'm going to just talk about reward and then recognition and then promotion. So I'm a narrative inquirer. That's the methodology that I adore. And I look into higher education. So I'm very interested in research development, and I'm very interested in early career researcher pathways. So the first story I'd like to share, which is related to rewards, begins when I was working at James Cook and travelled to Papua New Guinea and engaged with some lovely people that were trying to conduct research in an environment where their library was extremely poorly resourced, and their time for research was very limited because of heavy teaching and administrative loads. And there was this, I became a mentor and a member I felt great privilege to be invited to join a Women's Significant Interest group. And the two things they wanted was library access and publications. So we had some discussions about the library access, but I was able to engage them in the process of writing a publication. And the publication, because they wanted it for promotional purposes, I targeted a gold publishing journal, which is led by a commercial publisher who will take the copyright, not charge us to view it, but charges universities to get a subscription so that people can look at the articles. And the special issue for that journal was extraordinarily successful. Our article was only a part of that, obviously. And they invited us to participate in a webinar to further promote the work and to make it more available. And the response to that was so overwhelming that the publisher came back and said, we're just going to make this journal issue open access. We know people have to see this. We feel an ethical responsibility to make this available more broadly. And so based on what's happened here, where we're going to make this open access. And that felt like an extraordinary battle to win without really trying. And I think it speaks to the power of us as users and readers and researchers and scholars and practitioners to influence and enable the progress of open access through our active engagement with the work of others and with the way that we engage in scholarship. So I hope that makes sense, Julian. I hope you can see where I'm trying to draw a line with what you were talking about. And the second story I have is related to this notion of recognition. And big shout out to Alan Levine, who is from OE Global, as we all say. And this relates to the Confident Supervisors book that I was involved in. So again, I was finishing up my contract as the coordinator of research supervision at James Cook, and unlike many universities, we were having some funding issues, and there was a question about whether my contract would continue. And in discussions with my dean, Christine Bruce, we said, this is the time for us to create an open access resource to support supervisors should this position not continue, so that there will be a way of supporting the scholarship of supervision going forward. And so we contacted the library, who were magnificent, and Alice and Claire took us through the process of creating an ePress book. And we went through a journey of identifying how we could create this book within our workload, within our capacity. At the time, I was just finishing off my PhD and a little tiny bit preoccupied and anxious about starting the process of writing a book on top of everything else. But we formed an editorial committee of 5. We attracted 30 different people from around the globe who were friends and networks that we knew with expertise. And we put together chapters of a book that spoke to the scholarship of supervision. And we also applied for a call grant, but we weren't successful. But I'd have to say real value in doing those call grants. It allowed us to synthesize and articulate and make clear our vision for the book, which really informed how we progressed, because we were able to generate the book within 12 months of its inception, which I think was a lovely achievement. And Claire then prompted us to apply for an OE Global Award, and we got a significant innovative impact award for our book, along with another fabulous open access book for anybody that's got children in primary or high school who are wondering what it is that you do at the university and what this whole research thing is. Their book is Stories of Nobel Prize winners explaining to children their research impact and how they got a Nobel Prize for it. It's just a glorious book, and any child, I'm sure, would be inspired to research from doing that. But our Confident Supervisors also got an award, and we were very grateful for that. And it was really based on our ability to structure and demonstrate that contribution to the scholarship of supervision that made that book really valuable. We then went on to promote the book, which took some extra time and some extra energy. So the Australian Council of Graduate Research was very supportive of us, and we did 3 blogs and podcasts for them. We presented at conferences around the world, and we've presented at various other venues, wherever anybody will invite us or where we have friends and relatives. And the book has really received quite a lot of interest. And for me, what's come out of it is my research network has expanded. My profile as a researcher has expanded. I was invited to be a member of the External Advisory Board for the UK New Generation Research Supervision Programme. And it was largely on the basis of that, I'm sure. And that experience of doing that book has helped me with the writing of my next book. And we are now on to doing volume 2 of the book with even even more exciting and different practices to share. So lovely to have that impact story of impacting the practices of other universities. 82 universities around the globe have said that they've adopted or adapted our work. And we can see from the way that people are using our book, from the metrics that are on that e-press book, that people aren't just going in and looking at the book one-off. It is actually a textbook that they spend, hours reviewing and examining to support them in the work that they're doing. And just the intrinsic rewards for that are great. A lovely story that came out of it was, we made it open access, and I was so thrilled. And I said, everybody's got it. It's great. It's great. And then these people kept on emailing me and saying, can you send me a copy of the book? I don't have a copy of the book. And I wrote back to them and I said, here's the link. Just go there. It's yours. Have it. And eventually somebody asked me 3 times and I said, what is the problem? And she said, we haven't got very much internet and we haven't got very much electricity. Can we please have a download? I need to print it off and read it because I can't do it online. We just don't have the infrastructure for that. So we created the link and it came together, and it was such a humbling thing to realize I just had made such assumptions about everybody's access to everything. So learning all the time. And the wonderful Tanya Harden, who's helping us to do the 2nd volume of the book from QUT, has come up with a little link, which we think is transformational, which allows us to translate our book into 50 languages instantaneously. And so again, we're hoping that that will widen the audience and make it more accessible and ensure that it's available. Obviously, we're using a Google Translate function, and so we'll have to put in an apology that Google Translate may not be correct. But it's a starting point, and we hope that that'll be valuable. And the final thing I wanted to talk about, if there's time, is just that notion of promotion. So there's a lovely book, a lovely article that came out in 2003. There's the link, talking about what the criteria are around the world and the sort of trends and things that are happening. As Julian so rightly said, the easiest way to assess somebody is by counting the numbers. And so inevitably we see in the way that promotional criteria are managed and selection criteria are used, there are these elements of counting, which are acknowledged as not being precise and exact, but they do drive things. And for anybody that's looking for promotion or looking for jobs, then sadly the thing is tailoring your experience, your expertise, your background, your knowledge to show the highest quality and the highest number of outcomes and impacts to make yourself the suitable person in this extraordinarily competitive environment. So the little story that I was going to tell from that was 2 of my friends have applied for promotions in the last few years. One of them received his promotion and was delighted and thrilled, and then his contract ended and he's applying for any job that he can get, and that promotion no longer really means very much to him, which I think is tragic. And the second story is about a colleague of mine who applied for promotion and was so buzzed by having been so successful. She's applying for promotion again. And it has just stimulated her rate of output, her engagement with teaching, her commitment to service. She's taking on leadership roles. She's out there joining committees and doing everything humanly possible. And I'm sure she's positioning herself extraordinarily well for realizing that. I do have an upcoming book on early career research pathways, which has a chapter that talks about open education, and another one and a lot of comments about promotion and managing advancement for realizing career pathways. So hopefully that'll be useful to somebody sometime.
Are you considering, Susan,
it's not open access.
Are you considering doing an audiobook version of your
any of the
competence
books?
Supervisors ones?
I have to say, Amanda, you inspired me. I hate listening to myself or looking at myself. So the idea of finding some generative AI function that I can just turn on that'll read it without it sounding too mechanical or mechanistic would be really, really
I would love Beyonce. If we could get Beyonce's voice from my audiobook.
Yes.
You could pick Stephen Fry. You know,
On the contrary,
Exactly.
I think both of your voices are really pleasant to listen to, and I could listen to them all day.
I did have a
Um,
student say in
that
my
was
feedback, Amanda, you do not have a voice for radio.
Yes, exactly. It's just tough, David.
cheeky,
I
too
hope
cheeky.
that was all right. I'm sorry, I meant to put my clock on and I didn't. So
No, no, no. I'm I was aware that the time was tipping away, but I thought what you were speaking about was so valuable it wasn't worth interrupting. So yeah, indeed, Alan, human voice is definitely best. We can feel your personality and your warmth coming through, which is really lovely. And I really appreciated what you were saying there, Susan, about how well what I was hearing was that the open community was there are so many opportunities and there's so much supportive goodwill there for you once you step into it, that there are all these kind of rewards and recognitions that could have come about through the community because everybody's trying to really bring each other
lift
up.
each other up.
Yeah. I don't think we have any other questions in the chat from what I could see. Amanda or Julian or Stephen, did you have a quick question for Susan at all? Amanda does.
I
Thank
just
you.
had one. Susan, do you think that our older universities, our group of 8, are a little less flexible on looking at OER? I've talked to people in group of 8 about, oh, maybe you could write an OER as a great way to demonstrate impact and as an outcome. And quite often people just look at me and go,
Look at you.
our university would never accept that.
That's really interesting. So the second person that I was speaking about that's applying for their next promotion is from one of the group of 8 universities. And she said, I'm so glad that you're working in that open education space. And it's so altruistic of you because it has so little value for your recognition and reward in terms of promotion and tenure. And it's something that I don't have the time to do at the moment because that's the target that I'm looking at. But I acknowledge that open science is a good thing and we should be doing it, but not me today. So yeah, I think that is a real concern. We all know that open science is so important for scholarship, for new knowledge creation, for those diversity, inclusivity, equity targets that we all look for sustainable development of our world that we share. It is a bit difficult to understand why it is so hard to get the metrics for that, but I know our librarian friends are working at it, and I know that there is a battle underway between those green and diamond scholarly-led publishers and those gold and bronze commercially led publishers that distinguish between holding your copyright, making things available for free deposit, free reading, free reuse, and taking a little bit longer, creating perhaps a more professional product and encasing it in authorship guidelines that meet the drivers for getting good rankings and getting good citations and getting good outcomes, and then just plonking a few costs along the way to realize the most extraordinary profit margins. Our publishers have extraordinary profit margins and are using up the budgets of not only our libraries but our universities, and yet we continue to publish in those journals, which are fabulous, but is it sustainable? So thank you, Amanda, for asking that question and for me being calm and reasonable about my response.
Thank you, Susan. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I want to make sure Stephen has enough time to share his experience. So I'm going to throw the floor over to you now, Stephen, and hopefully we'll have some more questions come through, more time at the end for that. Thanks, Stephen.
Hey everyone. So I guess I'm speaking from the perspective of the open education program at La Trobe as a whole, rather than an individual academic perspective. And our program, La Trobe Bureau, has existed for 9 years. And yeah, one of persistent problems is this difficulty in achieving recognition. And I think, you know, we've made some missteps and gone down some paths, like trying to get ERA credit for OERs, which has been like trying to put a square peg through a round hole, you know, a real misfit that hasn't been that fruitful. So, you know, that kind of led to some frustrations that it seemed obvious to us that our open ed projects with academics were deserving of recognition, but it wasn't that obvious to others. And bit of a spoiler alert, I'm actually going to jump straight to the ending before coming back to this. Our solution to this really had two main elements. Firstly, we wiped the slate clean and reframed our whole open textbook publishing program to center open educational practices at the heart of what we do. And the second part was we really focused on problem-focused OER design planned specifically as educational interventions. So now that you've got the spoiler, let's return to the challenges faced in seeking reward and recognition, because I think the solution will make more sense in that context. I guess our frustrations led us to a really key question. What is it about openness that seems to go so unrecognized and meet so much indifference? And I say seems because I think this is not inevitable, but it does seem that way a lot of the time. And I think it comes down to a paradox within open education, that open ed is basically about one defining superpower, and that superpower is freedom, you know, freedom for free of cost for our students, freedom for teaching staff to teach how they want, all of this kind of thing. But because of that, open ed faces the same paradox that freedom faces, which is that freedom on its own doesn't inherently achieve anything really, yet it's one of the defining things about education and, well, humanity. So, you know, you can talk about being free until the cows come home, but it doesn't mean you're using your freedom to achieve anything concrete. So in a way, it only becomes powerful when it's paired with purposeful action to make changes. And so open licensing, open access, open ed have the same problem. By themselves, they aren't inherently impactful or narratively persuasive. And I think assessors of promotion applications, for example, look for exactly those two things, you know, narrative coherence and impact. And I think OER projects are really vulnerable to the so what question from reward and recognition decision makers. And that by itself opens not super persuasive for gaining academic recognition unless it's paired with what I think Adrian Stagg has called symbiotic practices. In other words, highly purposeful solutions that solve defined problems in concrete contexts that basically become superpowered when paired with open. But those things have to be paired. And I would call those things, that package is basically an intervention, right? So in our experience at La Trobe, reward and recognition is a lot more likely if you can lean into demonstrating how your open ed project is part of a problem-focused learning and teaching intervention. And I guess the tricky part of this is that assumes that you've planned your open ed project as an intervention from the beginning. So reward and recognition success for open ed isn't all about how you write your application. That's a big part of it, but it's also kind of in the beginning of your project, you know, how well you've identified the problems you face in your teaching and how you incorporate them into the project by designing the solutions to those problems into your OER so that it becomes a vehicle that enables that intervention. And obviously, Julian's done that very well. And oh, I'm trying to share screen, but I can't do it.
You should be able to now.
Okay,
Stephen,
cool.
maybe try again. Yep.
Just wanted to show this. This is basically how Julian create a really systematic understanding of the problems in biochemistry, learning and teaching, and particularly his course. Got really specific and then used those to create guiding principles for his OER that solve all those, big, wicked problems through the OER's intervention. Similarly, Julia Dem, who led this climate conscious lawyers project, put a lot of energy into mapping this curricular and pedagogical change, and did a survey of Australian legal educators, got a lot of information and background on what is the problem, so that you can know what you're solving through the design of your OER. So framing things in that way comes with a lot of benefits of aligning, purpose and practice, purpose and content, and making evaluation a lot easier because it's all aligned with the problem solving. And a crucial thing about interventions is that you evaluate them to see if they worked, right? So you generate, and through that you collect research data, you generate evidence, and that potentially forms research publications, potentially open data sets that you can share with an open license. And all of these things speak directly to both learning and teaching academic promotion criteria, but also research role criteria for those who seek promotion into that side of the career path. So yeah, the scholarship of learning and teaching link with OERs is really key. And if you shape it as an intervention, it's basically, we did a thing, we want to know whether it worked. So based on our original goals and indicators of what we hope success would look like, how can we evaluate whether we fulfilled them? And then using that evidence and data and continue to change based on that, you can then really lean into the open part, showing that not only have you solved a local problem in your course, but you can use open licensing to make that solution scalable across the department, across the university, across the discipline as a whole, and that open collaboration potentially across the globe generates, like mass interventions that generate mass evidence. And Julian has found that a lot of the use of his text has been from overseas. And I think it's because of that problem-focused intervention aspect of his OER project. And all of these things, particularly like the impact beyond your institution, those really speak to specifically level C and level D promotion criteria that are really common in most institutions. And they usually ask, how are you showing that you've got a broader impact beyond your institution, beyond your course? And also, how are you showing leadership in the discipline? I think it can also help for level A and B promotions as well. People have mentioned analytics, so I think I might just skip past that part because I know we're running out of time. Yeah, so I guess we really pivoted sharply towards learning and teaching criteria in relation to OERs and getting reward and recognition for that. And yeah, basically we found that there's really, really strong alignment between open educational practices and the, I guess, typical kind of most common reward and recognition criteria. So I created this table as part of my Open Ed Australasia chapter, and put the most common reward and recognition criteria, match them against things that OEP can do. And yeah, I really do think it's a very strong match, but you do have to note that I don't think there are any promotion criteria that explicitly mention open. And so you have to really connect the dots. That's the key part of it, that you have to connect the dots between your open project and how it's enabling those criteria. I thought I'd also mention that Julia Dem, I think, is in this meeting, and she was recently promoted to associate professor. And so that's a recent example of a successful promotion based on an open ed project. And I think, again, it's because it was a very highly purposeful open ed project based on a strong picture of the problem that she's solving. And Julia, maybe if there's time, you could speak to that. I know we're running out of time, so just my main takeaways, I guess, I think whether you receive reward and recognition, yes, it depends partly on the application, but the ideation process at the beginning of a project, for creating a really clear purpose, intervention, all of that is super important. So it starts at that early planning phase. And my second takeaway would be, when writing promotion applications, basically assume the assessor knows nothing about OER and probably doesn't care about OER. And so anytime you introduce your open work as part of an application, ask yourself, how clear is the context, purpose, and supporting evidence for this? And, how does it fit into your practitioner story? How does it support that narrative? What's the problem it's solving? And are you using the full diversity of evidence, both quantitative and qualitative, for how it's worked as an intervention? And if you can do that, I think the power of open becomes, as mentioned earlier, kind of paired with its symbiotic practices from your own context, your own local specific context, to create a more persuasive case than without open. So, yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. That was amazing. Symbiotic practices is, really, really powerful idea. But I just want to acknowledge that we've covered so many angles of this topic today, going from the personal educator development rewards, the psychological and emotional rewards, and finally here, looking at doing something deliberate and purposeful and planning the design of your open project as well is amazing. Thank you all so much. And I know, Julia, you are here. I'd love to call on you if you feel comfortable to tell us a little bit about that project. It would be great.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for such a wonderful session. I guess I can only really reiterate what everyone's said, but our project, as Stephen has introduced, was about a broader project about trying to transform legal education to make it more climate conscious. And the development of an OER was a key part of enabling us to do that, because it meant that we could create resources that would allow educators to incorporate climate change considerations in their teaching and make it easier for them to do so. So in my promotion application, I really drew on that sort of criteria under teaching about national level pedagogical leadership, and to demonstrate that this was a project that was sort of really driving national level pedagogical change in my area, namely law, and how the OER contributed towards that. There's also criteria under teaching and learning about leadership in curriculum design and assessment. And so if your OER contributes towards, a broader change in curriculum design and assessment, there might be ways of linking that in there. One of the other areas where I really brought in the OER was under, we've now got a section on scholarship for learning and teaching, as well as research generally. And so I really highlighted, again, the OER work that we'd done. I was fortunate enough to get a small grant to support this work as well. So I was able to use that as part of the narrative, but also the development of pedagogical resources. But I think also, I think as Stephen mentioned, we did that survey as well to sort of understand what the baseline is, with the idea in mind that we'll try and do a similar survey 3 years afterwards to sort of show the take-up of our OER resource and how it's changed pedagogy across the legal field. And so that's sort of, additional work to creating the resource, but it's sort of doing a study that helps us understand, one, the need for the resource and how it's been taken up and the impact of the resource. And so there's ways, I think, too, of thinking about, again, like it's, a capacity question, but about whether there's sort of further scholarship around learning and teaching that can be done around the development of a resource that can count towards those scholarship of learning and teaching goals. So for me, it was a huge part of our narrative. And I guess too, I think there's things that we can sort of draw on with OER resources that are more amorphous too than some of the criteria around research and teaching as well. Like we were fortunate enough to be awarded a Vice Chancellor's Award for Connected because the OECR resource development was a collaboration between people in the law school, as well as people in the library, as well as, we've got 46 authors from 16 different institutions involved in this resource. And so it is such an example of sort of one of these cultural qualities of being connected that La Trobe's trying to promote. So again, to the university that you're at has, a lot of rhetoric around inclusion or accessibility or equity that I think, we can draw on, OER, how it demonstrates, achievement in those sort of areas as well. Some of those sort of more soft cultural qualities that we know are so essential.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Julia. If you can get a hold of what the promotion criteria are at your university and start mapping them across to the qualities of OER, then that's definitely one way to support that. Thank you all so much. We are totally out of time. I apologize for that. As usual with these sessions, we need like another half hour to really talk about everything. But I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank our guest speakers, Amanda, Julian, Susan, and Stephen, for your time, and Julia at the end here as well. I bow to all of you for your inspiration. Thank you so much. Another big thank you to the UTS Open Education Week Committee, Mace, Helen, Jenny, and Scott. It's been a brilliant week so far. Please join us again for the final event tomorrow, which is Open Educational Resources and Practices for Impactful Learning Design. We'll pop the link in the chat. And thank you all of our community for engaging with us as well. Oops, sorry. Pop that link in the chat. There it is. Oh, someone already did it. We'll distribute the recording for this very soon. And we also have a little feedback form if anyone has a moment for that. We appreciate it so much to make these events improved every year. Thank you, everybody. You're all free to go. Please go and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See you all.
Thanks, David.
Cheers. Bye-bye.